Chapter 1. An Unwelcome Reminder. The quiet hum of the forest surrounded Ethan Carter, blending seamlessly with the soft chirps of crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. The stars above were clear tonight, unobscured by city lights or pollution, their twinkling light casting a faint glow over his secluded cabin. This isolation was why Ethan had chosen this place, a refuge from a galaxy he'd once been so deeply entangled with. Years ago, Ethan had been a key diplomat, humanity's voice in interstellar negotiations during a period when Earth was tentatively reaching out to alien civilizations. The work had been grueling, filled with endless debates, cultural misunderstandings, and moments of peril. But it had also brought him into contact with beings he'd never imagined, including Talira. Talira. Her name floated into his mind unbidden, as it often did when the nights were quiet. She had been a high-ranking envoy from the Ilari, a proud and enigmatic alien species known for their grace and ferocity. Their shared mission during the Triadic Accord crisis had been one of the most intense experiences of his career, and against all odds, they had succeeded. But the cost had been personal. Just as quickly as their bond had formed, Talira had vanished, leaving Ethan with unanswered questions and a gaping sense of loss. A sharp, unfamiliar hum jolted Ethan from his thoughts. He sat up in his chair on the cabin's porch, scanning the forest. The sound grew louder, more distinct, a deep thrumming that vibrated through the air and into his bones. His breath caught as a faint glow illuminated the treetops in the distance. "No," he whispered, standing abruptly. He hadn't seen that kind of light, heard that kind of sound, in years. The glow grew brighter, accompanied by the unmistakable whir of alien technology. A sleek, silver vessel descended into the clearing beyond his cabin, its surface shimmering with an almost liquid quality. It was unmistakably Ilari, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. As the ship settled onto the ground, its engines hissed and fell silent. A ramp extended, the movement smooth and deliberate. For a moment, there was nothing, just the stillness of the forest and the quiet anticipation of whatever was about to emerge. And then she stepped out. The return. Talira's silhouette was unmistakable. Her tall, elegant frame moved with the same feline grace Ethan remembered, her shimmering blue skin catching the starlight. Her dark, metallic armor clung to her form, its design intricate and ceremonial. But her eyes, those piercing, golden eyes, were the same as they had been all those years ago, filled with an intensity that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Ethan Carter," she said, her voice rich and melodic, carrying the weight of something unspoken. She stopped at the base of the ramp, her gaze locking onto his. Ethan didn't move. His mind raced with a mix of emotions: confusion, anger, and something else he didn't want to name. "Talira," he finally managed, his voice low. "What are you doing here?" Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You called me once. Perhaps it is time I return the favor." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What the hell does that mean? You disappeared, Talira. You left no explanation, no warning. And now you just show up here, years later, expecting what, exactly?" Talira's expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes: guilt, maybe, or regret. "I had no choice but to leave, and I will explain everything. But not here. May I come in?" Ethan hesitated, his instincts warring with his curiosity. Finally, he nodded sharply and stepped aside, motioning toward the cabin. Inside the cabin. The interior of the cabin was modest but comfortable, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books and trinkets from Earth and beyond. Talira glanced around as she entered, her expression neutral, though her eyes lingered on a few items: a carved alien figurine, a framed photo of Ethan with his old diplomatic team. "You've built a quiet life," she observed, her voice softer now. "That was the idea," Ethan replied, crossing his arms. "Why are you here, Talira? And don't give me some cryptic nonsense about favors." Talira turned to face him fully, her golden eyes meeting his. "Because I couldn't forget you." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She stepped closer, her tone steady but tinged with something raw. "When I left, it wasn't by choice. My people, my duties demanded it. But in all the years since, Not a day has passed where I haven't thought of you, Ethan. Ethan's chest tightened, a flood of memories and emotions threatening to overwhelm him. If that's true, why didn't you come back sooner? Why now? Talira hesitated, then said, because I'm being hunted. The threat. The weight of her words hit Ethan like a blow. Hunted? By who? The Dralvek Syndicate, Talira said, her voice grim. A powerful faction that operates beyond the borders of most known civilizations. I crossed them during a mission I took to protect my people. Now, they want revenge. And they will stop at nothing to find me. Ethan stared at her, trying to process the revelation. So, what? You came here to hide? Talira's gaze hardened. No. I came here because you are the only one I trust. Ethan's breath caught, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then, his skepticism kicked in. You expect me to believe that? After all this time? After you disappeared without a word? Yes, Talira said simply. Because it's the truth. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. And what do you think I can do, Talira? I'm not a diplomat anymore. I'm not anyone anymore. That's not true, Talira said, stepping closer. You are resourceful, intelligent, and brave. You proved that during the Triadic Accord crisis. You have always underestimated yourself, Ethan. Her words stirred something in him, an ember of the person he used to be, the person he thought he'd left behind. But he pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the present. If what you're saying is true, then you've brought danger right to my doorstep. What happens when the Syndicate finds you here? Talira's jaw tightened. Then I will fight. I have no intention of letting them harm you. The decision. The room fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Ethan paced, his thoughts racing. Talira watched him, her expression unreadable but her posture tense. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. All right, I'll help you. But I need the whole truth, Talira. No more half-answers. If we're going to deal with this, I need to know everything. Talira nodded, relief flickering across her face. You have my word. Ethan sighed, the magnitude of what he was agreeing to sinking in. And if this goes south, I hope you're ready to fight. Because I'm not dying for someone who walked out on me. A faint smile touched Talira's lips, though there was a sadness behind it. I never wanted to leave, Ethan, and I will not let you pay for my mistakes. As the night deepened and the stars above shifted, the two former allies sat down to plan their next move. Unbeknownst to them, far above the earth, a sleek Dralvek ship was already closing in, its scanners honing in on the faint trace of Ilari technology. Chapter 2. Rekindling the Past. The low hum of the holographic map illuminated the darkened cabin, casting flickering blue light over the wooden walls. Talira moved gracefully around the small space, analyzing the projection she had summoned from her wrist device. The map displayed Earth and its orbit, marked with faint pulses of energy signatures, one of which was far too close for comfort. The Dralvek Syndicate isn't subtle, she said, her voice low but sharp. They're already here. Their scouts will pinpoint my location soon. Ethan sat in a worn armchair, his jaw clenched as he processed her words. He had wanted a quiet life, far away from the chaos of the galaxy, but now that chaos had come to him in the form of Talira and her pursuers. Part of him resented her for dragging him into this, but another part he had buried deep felt alive again for the first time in years. Okay, he said, standing and crossing his arms. If they're already in orbit, why haven't they attacked yet? Talira's golden eyes flicked toward him, and her expression softened slightly. The Syndicate thrives on fear. They won't strike until they're certain of success. They'll probe, test, and isolate their target before moving in. And we're just supposed to sit here and wait for them? Ethan asked, frustration creeping into his tone. No, Talira replied, stepping closer to him. We prepare. A painful reunion. As Talira adjusted her armor and recalibrated her holographic map, Ethan couldn't help but study her. She looked almost the same as she had during the Triadic Accord crisis, though there were subtle differences. The glow of her skin was dimmer, the edges of her movements less fluid. She seemed worn. You're different, Ethan said before he could stop himself. Talira glanced at him, one elegant brow arching. Am I? Ethan nodded. You used to be, I don't know. Sharper. Stronger. What happened to you? For a moment, Talira didn't answer. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. The years have not been kind, Ethan. After I left Earth, I returned to the Elari Dominion, only to find that my actions during the crisis had made me expendable. I had defied orders to save your people. To them, that was treason. Ethan's stomach twisted. They punished you for that? After everything we accomplished together? They did, Talira said, her tone bitter. Exile was their mercy. I was stripped of my rank, my purpose, and sent to the edges of known space. For years, I survived as a mercenary, taking whatever jobs I could to stay alive. Ethan's anger flared, but it was tempered by guilt. He had always assumed Talira had abandoned him by choice, but now he realized how wrong he had been. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. I could have helped. Talira met his gaze, her golden eyes shining with something unspoken. Because I didn't want you to be dragged into my shame. You deserved better than that. The first skirmish. The conversation was interrupted by the sharp beeping of Talira's wrist device. She tapped it, and a holographic display lit up with a new energy signature A Dralvek scout ship, descending through Earth's atmosphere. They found us, she said, her voice icy. We don't have much time. Ethan grabbed a small pistol from a drawer, the weapon a relic of his time as a diplomat in hostile territory. What's the plan? Talira glanced at the weapon, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. That won't be enough. Maybe not, Ethan admitted, but it's a start. The two moved quickly, exiting the cabin and heading into the dense forest that surrounded it. Talira led the way, her movements silent and deliberate, while Ethan struggled to keep up, his boots crunching against the undergrowth. The scout ship landed in a clearing ahead, its sleek, black hull gleaming under the moonlight. A ramp extended, and 3 Dralvek soldiers emerged, their armored forms imposing and heavily armed. Talira motioned for Ethan to stay back. Let me handle this. Before he could protest, she stepped into the clearing, her energy blade igniting with a sharp hiss. The Dralvek soldiers turned toward her, their weapons raised, but Talira was already moving. She was a blur of motion, her blade cutting through the air with precision. Sparks flew as she deflected plasma bolts and closed the distance between her and her attackers. Ethan watched in awe as Talira dispatched the soldiers one by one, her movements a blend of grace and ferocity. Within moments, the clearing was silent again, save for the crackle of her energy blade. Still think I've lost my edge? She asked, glancing back at him. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Not at all. Rekindling the bond. As they made their way back to the cabin, the tension between them began to ease. The adrenaline of the fight had brought back memories of their past missions, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of the camaraderie they had once shared. You were incredible back there, he said as they entered the cabin, just like old times. Talira gave him a small, almost shy smile. It felt good. Fighting for something again? Ethan hesitated, then asked, Why did you really come back, Talira? Was it just because of the syndicate? Her smile faded, and she met his gaze. No, I came back because I couldn't forget you. No matter how far I went, or how much time passed, you were always there, in the back of my mind. I thought, maybe I could find peace here, with you. Ethan's breath caught. The vulnerability in her voice, the weight of her words, struck something deep within him. Talira, I missed you too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Talira stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his. We have a fight ahead of us, Ethan. But no matter what happens, I need you to know I will not leave you again. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. And I'm not letting them take you. A new threat. The night was far from over. As Talira worked to repair and upgrade the cabin's defenses, Ethan monitored her holographic map. A new signature appeared larger than the scout ship, and far more dangerous. A syndicate dropship, Talira said, her tone grim. They're sending reinforcements. Ethan clenched his fists. Then we'll be ready. Together, they prepared for the battle to come, their bond stronger than it had been in years. Talira's return had brought danger, but it had also reignited a spark Ethan thought he had lost forever. The syndicate was closing in, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at him. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. Chapter 3. The Siege. The quiet of the forest was shattered by the rumble of engines. Ethan stood near the edge of the clearing, his pulse racing as he peered through the trees. The Dralvek Syndicate's dropship loomed in the sky above, its dark silhouette blotting out the moonlight. He could see its landing thrusters firing, glowing bright orange as it descended toward the same clearing where Talira had dispatched the scout team. Inside the cabin, Talira was working furiously, her fingers moving deftly over her wrist-mounted device. Holographic blueprints of the cabin and surrounding terrain floated above her. She had turned the simple structure into a defensible stronghold, rigging traps, reinforcing the perimeter, and setting up energy barriers using pieces of salvaged alien tech. "Ethan," Talira called, her tone sharp. "They'll be here in less than 5 minutes. Are you ready?" Ethan took a deep breath and turned back toward the cabin. "Ready as I'll ever be," he muttered, though his grip on the ancient plasma pistol in his hand was shaky. Talira met him at the doorway, her golden eyes scanning him critically. "You're nervous." "Understatement of the century," Ethan replied. "The last time I held a gun, it was ceremonial. I'm not exactly cut out for this." Talira stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're more capable than you think. Remember, survival isn't just about skill, it's about will." Ethan nodded, the warmth of her words bolstering his confidence. "All right, Commander. What's the plan?" The first wave. The dropship landed with a deafening thud, its boarding ramp extending with a hiss of hydraulics. From the shadows, Ethan and Talira watched as a dozen Dralvek soldiers marched down the ramp. Their armor glinted under the harsh lights of the ship, and their weapons hummed with lethal energy. They spread out in a calculated formation, their movements disciplined and precise. "Wait for it," Talira whispered, her energy blade already ignited but held low to avoid detection. "Let them step into the traps." Ethan's heart pounded as the Dralvek approached the cabin. The first soldier triggered a tripwire, and a burst of energy exploded from a concealed device, throwing him backward into the dirt. Another soldier stepped forward, only to be ensnared by a plasma net that electrified his armor, rendering him immobile. The remaining soldiers hesitated, their formation faltering. That was all Talira needed. She moved like lightning, her blade a blur as she darted into their midst. The Dralvek barely had time to react as she dismantled their ranks with precision strikes. Sparks and shouts filled the air as Ethan fired his pistol from the tree line, taking out a soldier who had managed to flank her. As the last Dralvek fell, Ethan emerged from cover, his breath ragged. "That wasn't all of them, was it?" Talira shook her head, her expression grim. "No, that was the vanguard. The real fight is coming." The siege begins. The second wave arrived not long after, this time accompanied by a walking siege drone, a massive, four-legged machine bristling with weapons. It lumbered through the trees, firing bolts of plasma that ignited everything they touched. Behind it came more Dralvek soldiers, their numbers doubling the first wave. Ethan stared at the machine, his mouth dry. "What the hell is that?" "A war beast," Talira said, her tone laced with disgust. "Primitive but effective. We need to disable it before it reaches the cabin." "Disable it?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "How are we supposed to do that?" Talira handed him a small, metallic device shaped like a disc. "Get close enough to attach this to its hull. It'll overload its systems." Ethan stared at the device, then at the advancing war beast. "That's suicide." Talira placed a hand on his shoulder, her golden eyes fierce. "I'll cover you. You can do this, Ethan." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." A desperate move. As the war beast fired on the cabin, Ethan darted through the trees, keeping low to avoid the soldier's line of sight. Plasma bolts whizzed past him, searing the air, but he pushed forward, clutching the device tightly. Talira was a blur of motion, drawing the soldier's attention with her energy blade. She deflected bolts with ease, her movements precise and lethal. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to marvel at her, wondering how someone so deadly could also be so graceful. The war beast loomed closer, its mechanical legs crashing through the undergrowth. Ethan took a deep breath and sprinted toward it, using the chaos of the battle as cover. He slid under its massive body, the heat from its thrusters making his skin prickle. With shaking hands, he attached the device to its hull and rolled away just as it began to spark and whine. "Get clear," Talira shouted. Ethan scrambled to his feet and ran as fast as he could. Behind him, the war beast let out a high-pitched screech as the device overloaded its systems. Its legs buckled, and it collapsed in a fiery explosion that sent shockwaves through the clearing. The turning point. The destruction of the war beast threw the Dralvek forces into disarray. Talira seized the opportunity, cutting through their ranks with renewed ferocity. Ethan, emboldened by his success, took cover and fired at any soldier who tried to flank her. Within minutes, the battlefield fell silent. Smoke hung in the air, and the once pristine forest clearing was now a smoldering wasteland. Talira stood at the center, her armor scorched but her posture unwavering. She turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said simply. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, his adrenaline still coursing through him. "Well, I didn't die. That's something." A hidden enemy. Before they could catch their breath, Talira's wrist device beeped urgently. She glanced at it and froze. "There's another ship inbound. Larger. Heavily armed." Ethan groaned. "Of course there is. What now?" Talira's jaw tightened. "This isn't just another wave. It's their commander. He's come to finish this himself? What does that mean for us?" Ethan asked. Talira met his gaze, her golden eyes burning with determination. "It means we fight. Together." The final stand. As the new ship descended, its silhouette even more imposing than the first, Talira and Ethan prepared for the final battle. The stakes were higher than ever, but something had shifted between them. Their bond, once strained by years of separation, had been reforged in the heat of battle. "I'm not leaving you," Ethan said as they took their positions. Talira glanced at him, her expression softening. "And I will not let them take you." The ship's ramp lowered, revealing a towering Dralvek commander clad in ornate, black armor. He stepped forward, flanked by elite soldiers, his crimson eyes locking onto Talira. "Kilira of the Ilari," he growled, his voice deep and menacing. "Your defiance ends here." Talira raised her blade, her stance unwavering. "If you want me, come and take me." The commander smirked. "With pleasure." The battle that followed would be their greatest challenge yet, but as Ethan and Talira stood side by side, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Chapter 4. The Return. The forest clearing was deathly quiet, save for the hiss of scorched earth and the soft hum of the descending Dralvek commander's ship. Its engines pulsed rhythmically, casting flickering shadows across the battlefield. Ethan gripped his plasma pistol tightly, his hands slick with sweat, while Talira stood beside him, her energy blade blazing with a defiant glow. The Dralvek commander strode down the ramp, his towering frame encased in black, jagged armor that seemed to absorb the light. His crimson eyes locked onto Talira, and a cruel smirk spread across his lips. "Kilira of the Ilari," he said, his deep voice reverberating like thunder. "I warned my soldiers not to underestimate you, but it seems even they weren't prepared for the likes of you. No matter. Their failure will not be mine." Talira raised her blade, her stance unwavering. "You've hunted me long enough, Draenix. This ends here." Draenix's smirk widened. "Indeed it does." Behind him, his elite soldiers fanned out, their weapons gleaming under the ship's lights. They moved with precision, their armor heavier and more advanced than the previous waves. Ethan felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just a fight, it was a death sentence. "Talira," he whispered, his voice tight. "What's the plan?" She glanced at him, her golden eyes steady. "We hold the line." The onslaught. The Dralvek soldiers charged, their weapons firing in unison. Plasma bolts lit up the clearing, tearing through trees and sending debris flying. Talira moved like a force of nature, her blade deflecting bolts with impossible speed as she closed the distance between her and the first wave of attackers. Ethan took cover behind a fallen tree, firing his pistol at any soldier who tried to flank her. His shots weren't as precise as Talira's strikes, but they hit their mark often enough to keep the Dralvek at bay. One soldier broke through the chaos, lunging at Ethan with a serrated blade. Ethan barely managed to dodge, his pistol clattering to the ground. The soldier raised his weapon for a killing blow, but before he could strike, Talira appeared, her blade slicing cleanly through his armor. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Ethan nodded, scrambling to retrieve his weapon. "Got it." A desperate gamble. As the fight raged on, it became clear that the Dralvek's forces were too numerous. For every soldier Talira cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Draenix watched from the ramp of his ship, his arms crossed, his expression one of smug confidence. "We can't keep this up," Ethan said, ducking behind Talira as another barrage of plasma fire rained down on them. "There's too many of them." Talira's jaw tightened. "Then we change the rules." She activated her wrist device, summoning a holographic interface. Ethan caught a glimpse of the map she'd been working on earlier, an overlay of the forest, with the cabin at its center. Several points on the map glowed red. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Triggering the failsafe," Talira replied. "I've rigged the area with explosive charges. It won't stop them, but it'll give us a chance to regroup." Ethan's eyes widened. "You're going to blow up the cabin?" Talira nodded. "It's a small price to pay." Before Ethan could argue, she pressed a command on her device. A series of explosions erupted around the clearing, sending Dralvek soldiers flying and creating a thick cloud of smoke and debris. The shockwave knocked Ethan off his feet, and for a moment, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. The final duel. As the smoke cleared, Talira stood amidst the wreckage, her blade glowing faintly in the dim light. Draenix stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching against the scorched earth. He drew a massive, serrated weapon that crackled with red energy, its edge jagged like broken glass. "Impressive," he said, his tone mocking, "but I expected more from the great Talira." Talira didn't respond. She simply raised her blade and charged. The 2 warriors clashed with a force that shook the ground. Sparks flew as their weapons met, the hum of energy blades mingling with the guttural snarls of Draenix and the sharp, controlled breaths of Talira. Their movements were a deadly dance, each strike and counterstrike faster and more precise than the last. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart in his throat. He wanted to help, but he knew he'd only get in the way. Instead, he focused on picking off any remaining Dralvek soldiers, ensuring they couldn't interfere. The duel reached its peak as Draenix swung his weapon in a wide arc, aiming to cleave Talira in 2. She ducked under the blow and surged forward, driving her blade into his side. Draenix roared in pain, but before she could press her advantage, he backhanded her, sending her sprawling. Ethan's stand. Draenix loomed over Talira, his weapon raised for the killing blow. Ethan acted on instinct, raising his pistol and firing. The shot struck Draenix in the shoulder, causing him to stumble. "Get away from her," Ethan shouted, his voice trembling but resolute. Draenix turned toward him, his crimson eyes blazing. "You dare?" Ethan fired again, but Draenix deflected the shot with his blade and began advancing on him. Ethan backed away, his heart pounding as he realized he was outmatched. Before Draenix could reach him, Talira rose, her blade igniting once more. With a roar, she charged, driving her weapon through Draenix's chest. The Dralvek commander froze, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the ground. Aftermath. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining Dralvek soldiers, seeing their commander defeated, retreated to their ship. Within moments, the vessel lifted off, disappearing into the night sky. Ethan sank to the ground, his legs trembling. Talira approached him, her blade deactivating as she knelt beside him. "You're hurt," she said, her voice soft. "I'll live," Ethan replied, managing a weak smile. "What about you?" Talira hesitated, then nodded. "I'll heal." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of what they had endured settling over them. Finally, Ethan spoke. "What now?" Talira looked at him, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Now, we rebuild. Together." Ethan smiled, the warmth in her words reigniting a spark he thought he had lost. Together. A new beginning. As dawn broke over the forest, the 2 of them began clearing the wreckage, their bond stronger than ever. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't face it alone. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt ready to face it. With Talira by his side, he knew they could take on anything. And so, as the sun rose on a new day, they set out to rebuild not just the cabin, but their lives, their trust, and the connection that had brought them back together.